listening to What in the World, brought to you by Great World Productions. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined by co-host Jacob Fulmer in this first edition of a brand new offering of Great World Productions. We will be in these short episodes, these short videos, each edition analyzing a question of some sort. What'll it be? What in the world will it be? Well, we don't know. That's why we call it What in the World. Jake, what in the world are we looking at today?
All right, so we're going to be answering just a few questions. So, again, we'll be doing these every other Wednesday. We may switch to every Wednesday, but for now, we're going to start off with every other Wednesday. Again, this is going to be your GWP What in the World Wednesdays. That's what we're going to call these short little videos. About a 10 to 15-minute discussion on who knows what in the world. So let's go ahead and start off with our first question. What makes someone truly trustworthy? Wow, this is a loaded question for the first question on GWP What in the World?
Well, I guess to answer the question, Jake, what makes someone truly trustworthy? Well, I feel like a great indication of that, probably the best indication that someone is trustworthy, is when they're willing to make a testimony against interest. In other words, they're willing to admit something that doesn't necessarily benefit them. Like, yeah, I did do that. I was wrong, right? But because that's not in their best interest. That's not something that they want to tell you. That said, though, I think this is a little bit of a loaded question. What makes someone truly trustworthy? Because generally, that's not a question you ask. Oh, why is that person trustworthy? Obviously, for certain level positions and different things, but ordinarily, of course, in the American legal tradition, certainly in my approach, we don't presume dishonesty. No, we presume honesty. We presume innocence, and so. In my estimation, this is something of a loaded question, something of a useless question. But to answer the question, I'd say the best indicator that someone is trustworthy is that they're willing to make a testimony against interest or admit a truth that doesn't look that great, that admitting that isn't necessarily in their best interest, as it were. Jake?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think it's one of those things where you almost have to lose your trust in a way in order to make someone not trustworthy. So a lot of people probably are, I would say, you could say a little bit trustworthy at the very beginning. I have to say, I take a little bit of a different approach than a lot of people. I usually don't really trust anyone to the full extent. I more trust people about halfway, but I always know that they could potentially burn me later on down the line. But that's just kind of my personality.
Well, yes, that sounds like a cold and bitter approach to it, but perhaps if that's what works for you, my friend, that's what works.
Well, and again, it's not necessarily that I just feel like that everybody is out to do wrong in the world. That's not necessarily what it is. I just have to really see a lot before I fully trust somebody. And again, I think that's where it goes back to this being a very loaded question. I mean, the real question is, what do we define as truly trustworthy?
Uh,
Partially trust, like, do we partially trust them? Do I trust this person with my life? Because I think those are really different definitions that would have different scenarios, really, overall, if you look at
right,
it from that
right. So, in your
perspective.
view, I reckon you're only approaching it with a healthy dose of realism, similar to the mentality, oh, you be nice, I'll be realistic. In a line from the movie Home Alone, which I famously starred in. We'll see a bit more of that later, I believe.
Yes, here in a few weeks on our Strange Request episode. That'll be our third episode this season. So happy that that season premiered last night. Of course, you can check out part two of our series next Tuesday. We will also have our final weekly update for the month of January next Monday, January 27th.
Absolutely. So certainly a memorable line, not to say one that I live by, Jake, but suppose there is some merit to approaching things, as you might say, with a healthy dose of realism. Now, what do we know? What in the world is our next question?
All right, well, let's look at it here. Again, this is similar to how we're going to be doing our informal debates. That's something that we're going to be starting next month. And so during those informal debates, we're going to be looking at questions generated by artificial intelligence. So you'll have to stay tuned for that. The difference is that's more of a debate. This is more just a back and forth discussion about certain topics here. It may look a little bit similar to our debates because the questions are generated by artificial intelligence, but our goal is to keep things a little bit more lighthearted during these discussions. So we'll go ahead and we'll look here at our second question on this first edition of What in the World. We've got why do people remember negative experiences more vividly than positive ones? I guess I'll go ahead and start off with this because I feel like that I really dwell on negative experiences of the past a little bit more than the average person, and that's not necessarily always the greatest thing. I will say that I have improved upon that in the past, but we'll go ahead and I think one of the things is that our mind immediately goes to that negative experience and we remember it so much because it's something that we don't want to relive. But yet we still relive it anyways because our mind is so focused on making sure that we remember what went wrong to ensure that we don't have a similar experience where it does go wrong. So I almost think that it's our brain's way of warning us to take action in order to not relive some of our more negative experiences. Isaac, what is your take on this question here?
Yeah, well, that's a great answer, Jake. Thanks for asking me. So, again, good point there, and that is possible that most of us sort of just have that natural tendency, or certainly a lot of us have that natural tendency towards pessimism and are already predisposed to remember those. That certainly could play a role in it. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. I would say, why do people remember the negative experiences more vividly than the positive ones? I'd say generally because they're more consequential. Again, this is somewhat to be unexpected, of course, as we know, sort of the principal difference between good and evil. Of course, good is substantial, evil is not. Evil is merely the privation of good. On the other hand, when something unfortunate happens to us, that's something measurable that's happening in the sense of things going well. Well, all things considered, many things we take for granted. Many of those things go well most of the time. That isn't terribly noteworthy. Again, that's similar to how many of these controversial news stories, these tragedies, well, they're the ones that sell the most. They're the ones that ultimately get the most press. And so that's what I'd say is we remember the most negative experiences more vividly than positive ones because they are more consequential. For example, if you have a car accident, if you have a sick day, those are all distinct consequential experiences. You don't necessarily remember each day that you didn't get in a car wreck or each day that you weren't sick because ordinarily, if we're being honest, a lot of it we may take for granted, but ordinarily those things go fairly well.
Yes, I think that's another very interesting point, and I think both of what we said is pretty accurate, I would say, as for reasons for why we remember negative experiences more vividly. Thank you for that additional insight. And so that really kind of, I think I'm going to ask another question, kind of as a follow-up question to the question presented, which is, what in the world can we do to ensure that we remember the positive experiences more vividly than the negative ones? Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, sure. There are certain momentous occasions that we want to recall, certainly holidays, different occasions with friends and family, which we want to remember. But unfortunately, it seems that we often end up mainly remembering the negative things. And again, while many of us are guilty, likely for taking certain things for granted, perhaps we could also say, in certain cases, it seems to be the case, and Jake, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, that ordinarily we don't commemorate particular seasons, holiday seasons, certainly, and different things as distinctly from an ordinary day as we had in the past. It's not to say that we live in a way that's that's impoverished, in which we don't enjoy anything, but on the contrary, to say that most of us are fairly fortunate, fairly privileged. There are a lot of things that we enjoy on a daily basis, and there's not a great deal of distinction between that and a major holiday, a major occasion with friends and family. So my recommendation would be to actually make a distinction. You don't need to be having a feast every day. You don't need to be having a celebration, a huge party every day. And likewise, you don't need to be fasting every day. It's important to eat on occasion, believe it or not. And
Really?
so it's important to have balance. And there are seasons for everything. I think it's important that we recognize it. If we do a better job of recognizing that and commemorating those different times of year, kind of along the course of the year on our calendar, I think that would do a great deal to kind of help flesh out the distinctions between those different sorts of occasions. Jake?
Yes, that could certainly change things quite a bit if we're more celebrating those holidays with a little bit more boldness, I guess you could say, and treating ordinary days not necessarily as a big celebration, but of a lesser degree. And so that could certainly help things out. Well, that's all the time that we have here for tonight. And so that will conclude things here. We will see you in a couple of weeks here on GWP What in the World Wednesdays.
Absolutely. I reckon it will. Well, thank you all for tuning again to the first edition of What in the World, brought to you by Great World Productions. That'll do it for now. So until next time,
I'm Jacob Fulmer.
and I'm Isaac Hedges, host of What in the World. From all of us at What in the World and Great World Productions, good night and God bless.